Well, as I said before, compromise means you agree to things you don't agree with, and I take very seriously the effects of this impasse on now 10,000 gate employees who received layoff notices today, and many of whom have gone through this kind of anxiety, followed by 2011 going over the cliff. And so I'm willing to concede on the funding for the schools, E12, to the Speaker's proposed $125 million, going down to my $150 million. As I think his own chart showed pretty clearly earlier today. They started at $159 million, and now they're up to $525 million of additional funding. And I've come down from close to $700 million down to $525 million. I had hoped to get them up to $150 million additional, $550 million total, and they just have absolutely refused. And you know, it's kind of hard for me to comprehend why people object to spending more money on young children. And that's what this is. If you take what we finally will agree to in terms of the allocation of that additional $125 million and look at what I proposed in terms of the spending $150 million, you'll see $25 million there, which is a number, but it's kids. It's kids who will not receive services that they would have otherwise. And again, we'll have to work out what the details of that are, but it's going to be kids who will not receive the quality educational opportunities. And why we have to debate about that with over $1 billion on the bottom line set aside for future tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires, it just astonishes me. But I realize that they have their own priorities and they have their own prerogatives, so I have no intention to see this go to a June 30th showdown and possibly a shutdown. It's just, I'm not going to subject people to that. The allocation of that money, I understand the Speaker proposed that their allocation of that in their proposal would be the determinative allocation, and I don't agree to that. I have my priorities, they have theirs, but I'm optimistic that we can work that out fairly swiftly in the same spirit of compromise. On the environmental bill, we're close. There are a couple of important details that separate us. Chief of Staff Jamie Tincher and Deputy Chief of Staff Kay Sen and Lieutenant Governor meeting with representatives of the House to protect the authority of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency to make decisions that are going to protect the people of Minnesota rather than having local governments decide for themselves whether and when they're going to meet these requirements. One of the most astonishing features to the Republican proposal was they wanted to give cities 15 years to meet minimum water quality standards. In other words, they want this. I'm astonished that the cities themselves, and this is primarily the League of Greater Minnesota Cities, whether it's their lobbyists or whether it's their members themselves, wanted an additional 15 years to have substandard water that does not meet minimum quality for safety and be able to continue to put that water in the glasses and the bathtubs and the like of their citizens, rather than do what's necessary. And if they need financial help, which they do, to come to the legislature and myself for the financial assistance necessary to bring that water up to acceptable standards. Really, that's the kind of stuff we're dealing with here, which is just really unfathomable to me, that people would have that priority, that people would not put the health and safety of Minnesotans first, that people would not put the better quality education of young children first. It's just a very different perspective on responsibilities of government. But again, we're going to get that worked out, I believe, shortly, and we'll proceed with that. We're still at disagreement on the responsibilities of the state auditor. You know, I was a state auditor for 4 years, so I have a perspective on that job. And as soon as I became auditor, the private CPA firms started to try to steal away clients by promising counties and other local governments a cheaper audit. Well, you can get a cheaper audit, but you won't have the kind of thoroughness that the state auditor's office provides. You won't have the kind of legal compliance. You won't have the kind of performance audits that, for example, the Office of the Legislative Auditor provides when it audits this office and other state agencies. But in this case, the counties want to save money, and they don't want an auditor who's going to tell them things they don't want to hear. Nobody likes an auditor who's going to come in and go over with a fine-tooth comb their practices and tell them what they shouldn't be doing and what they could be doing better to save taxpayer money. So that part to me is just still unacceptable. The auditor, when I was state auditor, we audited all 87 counties and the cities of the first class as well as other audits. Now the auditor audits 59 counties because back when there was a Republican governor and a Republican state auditor, they basically subscribed to this notion that the private firm should take over, and they whittled it down to 59 counties, which is what the state auditor now audits, which to me is appalling. Why do you have people in charge of an office and they don't believe in what it does? Well, now we have a state auditor who believes that is the responsibility. She ran against the state auditor just on that issue, and the voters of Minnesota put her in office and have re-elected her to have a public oversight over the expenditure of public funds. If the legislature wants to eviscerate that office, they'd have to go to the voters of Minnesota in a constitutional amendment and face up to it that way, rather than trying another round of turning the responsibilities of the state auditor over to private CPA firms, which is, again, eviscerating the principal purpose of that entity, its constitutional office. And I won't agree to it. So we're down to those basic issues. We also have issues on bonding and legacy, which I'm going to leave the bonding to the legislators to resolve. And the legacy, I believe we'll get that taken care of. So now it's a matter, if we get this agreement in short order on these final details, then we can get the four leaders together and talk about the parameters for a special session. I think sooner the better. I would like to see it either at the end of this week or very early next week, depending on the availability of legislators around the state and how much lead time they're going to need to reassemble. The five of us are going to need to sign, so this is going to have to be acceptable to all four caucus leaders and myself. And I appreciate the Lieutenant Governor. She's been heavily involved in this in the final round of negotiations with the Speaker and others, and I want to commend her for her leadership and for her ability to get to these final details close to resolution. We hope hopefully we'll get it done in a very short order. You want to add anything to that?
I'll just add one thing quickly. You know, in legislative sessions and politics, it's about the art of the possible. And what we have concluded is what is possible is $525 million more for education and for our kids, our greatest resource, and the really major steps forward for water quality. So while we have a lot more work to do to achieve what the governor and I set out to achieve this session around preschool, I think we were able to achieve some good things.
And I would just note that we're in agreement that the E12 bill will have 2% on the formula for each year, and also that the environment bill will have the same language for the buffers and for the avian flu as the bill that was passed by the legislature. Go ahead. Respond to questions.
So I guess I'm not clear. Is the standoff over or not?
Well, we're standing off on a diminishing number of details. So I think we're getting closer. That there's still we just presented our position on these environmental matters, and the Speaker and Chair McNamara took those under advisement, so we'll see how they respond to those. The auditor's office, they still want to keep the language which I signed because I didn't want to put the whole state government and everybody, that would be another 10,000 plus employees who wouldn't have been put at risk. And I decided I'd take this approach. I made it very clear when I signed that bill that the auditor's language is unacceptable to me. I mean, what was agreed upon, in my understanding, going into the conference committee, was that the legislative auditor would conduct an evaluation of the state auditor's work in terms of quality, in terms of price, in terms of efficiency, and then would make its recommendations to the legislature. And that was agreed upon. Out of conference committee came this further step that counties would have the option on August 1st to select their own private CPA firm without even giving the state auditor the existing ability to review those audits and determine whether they met minimum standards or not. That came out of conference committee and was adopted, but to make that decision to say even before the legislative auditor conducts the evaluation that they've already prejudged that the county should have the ability to go out and find a cheaper audit is, to my mind, just nonsensical. And it's also, as I say, violates what I consider to be the constitutionally established authority of the state auditor to do the work that it's been doing for many decades. And Bill, former Republican state auditor and former Republican governor, combined to eviscerate that part of the way. I don't understand why people take these jobs who don't believe in what they're supposed to be doing. But that was the case with that state auditor, and so now it's down to 59 counties as opposed to all 87 when I was state auditor. But that damage has already been done. But if they want to, eviscerate it further and give counties a chance just to opt out, as I say, they're really undermining the constitutionally established responsibility of the office. And if they want to change that, I think they should go to the voters of Minnesota with a constitutional amendment and ask the voters to decide whether they want to continue, the state auditor continue these responsibilities and have public oversight over the expenditure of billions of dollars in public funds, or whether they want to turn those over on a bid basis to private CPA firms.
So are you guaranteeing to those 9,400 and some state employees that their jobs will be there on July 1st?
We're getting very close.
Governor, how do you not there yet?
Well, we're not there until we have signed off at the special session. We're not there until the legislation is passed in the special session and I sign it. I mean, those are just the facts of it. But we made a major step. I conceded on my number one priority. I gave up my number one priority for all-day universal pre-K. So what Oklahoma's had for 25 years and Georgia's had for 20 years, Republicans in the Minnesota House have decided Minnesotans will have to, 4-year-olds will have to wait a while longer. And their parents will have to continue to keep paying for private child care rather than being able to send their kids to a quality public school pre-K program if they choose to do so. Enormous financial, talk about tax cuts for working Minnesotans. All-day kindergarten is a huge tax cut for all working Minnesotans because they don't have to pay for private child care. Same with universal all-day pre-K. The parents had the option to put their children in a quality program all over the state and go to work if that's what they need to do. So, but we're not there. I can't get the support to do it. It took me 4 years to get taxes on the wealthiest 2%. I'm not going to step back from this. I'll continue next year, next session, and the session after that until either I'm out of office or we have this enacted for the benefit of all 4-year-olds and all of their parents throughout Minnesota.
Governor, Speaker Dowd said he would accept your final offer from the final night of the session on the education bill. Is that what you're saying you're accepting too then?
Well, I'm accepting the amount of $525 million. But then I had specific allocation of that additional $125 million in my proposal. Now he wants to substitute his allocation in his last response last Friday. But I think we can work that out. I think we'll sit down and decide where that $125 million is going to go. But it's not going to be one way or it's not going to be the other way.
So Governor, what happened here? On Friday you said you weren't getting back in the room until it was at 5:50. Now it's 5:25.
You agree to things you don't agree with. I mean, I don't see this changing, right up to June 30th, and we're going to put 10,000 state employees who have have jobs and have families and incomes they rely upon. I mean, I'm very disappointed. As I said, all along the response was, well, what are we going to get for agreeing to this additional spending for kids? What you get is additional spending for kids. That to me should be incentive enough right there. But the other Republicans in the House don't see it that way, and I'm not going to change their minds. So let's make the best compromise possible under these circumstances. And again, I'll continue to carry this to the next legislative session and beyond.
Governor, Speaker Dowd said that those two bills that you vetoed will look very much the same than as they did when the legislature passed them.
Well, the only reason the extent they're the same is because the Republicans won't agree to the improvements that I want to make, but they are going to be materially different as a result of that. If he's trying to imply that we didn't need a special session, I would agree with him. If they had a decent bill, 3 decent bills I could have signed, wouldn't need a special session.
But the environment, those regulatory changes made, PCA and so forth, those will look significantly different than that bill that passed.
Well, but not look as different as I would like them to. We detailed, last week, we could provide further information on the specifics. But again, one of these was the amount of time it's going to take to comply. Another was they wanted, corporate polluters to be able to self-report and then be exonerated, and then continue to pollute and continue to self-report and continue to be exonerated. We've tightened that up. We conceded on the Citizens Board. I think that's unfortunate. 48 years has been an important part of the process in terms of environmental protection for citizens of the state, but they're insistent on that, and so we got part of it, and they got part of it, and that's the way we compromised it, turns out.
So have you talked to the speaker since Friday, and do you have anything planned to finish these talks?
I'm going to call him as soon as we're done here. The Lieutenant Governor's spoken with him twice today.
Yep. I spoke with him this morning and again a little later in the morning, and we just had a meeting with him shortly. So what we're trying to do here is to negotiate the details of these final bills so that we can get wrapped up.
I have spoken with Majority Leader Bach and with Minority Leader Thiessen to advise them of the situation. I'm not going to speak for them, but kept them advised, and I was going to call the speaker just before this, but I ran out of time.
Governor, I'm sorry, I'm really confused here. So the parameters of the larger agreement are there, there's just some final details underneath that need to be worked out.
Right.
So can we report that you've reached agreement in principle to end this budget impasse?
We've agreed on the dollars. We haven't agreed on the details, but we're close. We're very close.
But on the 2 bills that weren't the education bill, those were not about dollars, those were about details. And on the state auditor, it sounds like you're insisting that that be part of the special session, and there's no movement on that. So,
Well, that's where we are.
like as with my colleagues, how close are we to being done, or is
Well, close enough that if reasonable people, will have a resolution of the environment bill. And I don't know where we are in the auditor's office. I mean, again, they want to eviscerate the office. They want to privatize, the functions of the state auditor as a constitutional office. If they want to eliminate public oversight over the expenditure of public funds, then, they should take that to the voters of Minnesota. That's my strong view. I mean, why would I have the legislative auditor, a public entity, auditing me and auditing all the other branches of the state government? Why don't we get to pick our auditor too? I can find a private CPA firm who do the audit of this office for a fraction of what the legislative auditor does, and they wouldn't know what a performance audit was to begin with. So I could get away in the cheap, save money, and have nobody telling me what it is I don't want to hear.
So the auditor provision, would that be a standalone bill then?
Well, I'd like to see all this put into one bill. I think is the best way to proceed, but we haven't gotten to that point in the discussion. But all 4 caucus leaders and I would have to agree. In the past, we put everything into one bill. It's one vote, simplifies matters, and people decide if they want to end the standoff or not.
so what's your next step? When are you meeting with Dowd again?
I'm going to call the speaker and see where we are. I think the conversations that Lieutenant Governor and Chief of Staff, Deputy Chief of Staff had with, and Commissioner Link Stein had with Chair McNamara and his staff has been determinative. Then that should be basically concluded on the allocation of 125 million. That's one of the things I would talk with the Speaker about, is how we want to resolve that. I think we can get that resolved fairly shortly.
So does every detail of every bill need to be clear and settled before you call it?
Crystal. I mean, there's enough confusion that enters in from that point on. So yes, we need to have a bill. We need to have not that language that we need. I mean, I would think the 4 caucus leaders would want to have that very, very clear, as well as their members. I mean, any room for doubt or confusion is just going to, delay the process even further.
Anything else from anybody?
Are you going to be putting the Art Olnick book on eBay?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Are you going to be offering the Art Olnick book on eBay?
Well, I've got a book that he and Arthur Reynolds, their names are both, they gave me a copy of it last week, and I'm amazed they could get both their names on the same cover page. But, I think they share the same goal. We all share the same goal, is to provide better preparation for young children before they enter now kindergarten. I'm glad it's kindergarten rather than first grade. But it comes down to, in addition to the strategy, it also comes down to the resources to carry it out. And that's why, again, I'm astonished that we're, you look at that chart, which I guess the Republican leadership is so proud of somehow. They started at $156 million. They started at 0.6% on the formula. $1.9 billion surplus, and there is 0.6% on the formula to start, which would have been massive layoffs all over the state. And by their own, you look at that chart and you see how far they go up to a point of, 525 million, and I've come down to 550 million. It's like, that's something to be proud of. I mean, again, we just view this so differently. They view it as dollars, I view it as kids' lives.
Governor, when do you have to reach this crystal clear agreement in order to have that special session this week?
Well, we have to get the five of us signed on the, again, I can't speak for the other four, but I would think they would want something explicitly clear. I would think their members would too. So the clearer we can make it up front, whether it's actual statute or whether it's, I would prefer to see it statutory language so everybody knows this time what they're voting on.
You need to do that by tomorrow or Wednesday?
I'd have to talk with the four leaders and see how they want to proceed, but, I prefer to have it be this week. I gave up my son's birthday party in California, and visit with my other son on the weekend, so I'm around, and they're everybody's willing to, I just mean that parenthetically, we're all willing to give up what we need to do, but, we can get it done, but the important thing is to get it done right, and if the people out there who've gotten layoff notices know that we've got agreement in principle, which we're very close to, then I think they'll too want to get it done right.
Governor Smith, can you just talk a little bit about your discussions with state employees in advance of this, just sort of talk about the process and their years?
Sure. Over the last week or so, I've gone to visit several of the state agencies, the biggest agencies that are affected by the veto of these bills, and my message has just been really clear that we are working as hard as we possibly can to get this resolved, and that we really understand that for them, this is not a political dispute. This is personal. It's whether they're going to get their paychecks and their health insurance in July, and it's just that's been the basis of the conversation.
So are you so close that you can tell MMB to push the pause button on shutdown?
No, because by statute or by the contract, I guess, the bargaining agreement, they have to provide a 30-day notice, and today's 30 days before July 1st. So mine check with transfer. I believe those notifications are going out today already.
But there's some other things they're going to be working on, he said today.
Well, yes, I mean, as you get closer and closer to an actual, possible, to a real, possibility of shutdown, there are a number of things that will have to get closer. But again, we hope we will avoid the need for any of that.
But you're near a deal that will slow him down, any on the shutdown?
No, he's got to proceed on his own track.
Governor, if all this proceeds as it's expected or hold as you hope, how do you feel about this idea of leaving $1 billion at the bottom?
I think it's shameful. As I say, especially to turn your back on the needs of children's education. And it's 1.3 billion already, given the additional revenues that already come in. It's actual dollars that have come in beyond the forecast over the last 3 months. And I just listened to part of the speaker's news conference, but if I understood correctly, he was projecting estimating 1.5 billion surplus. So we got a surplus that's mounting, and they won't come up another $25 million to invest in their kids' better education. I think it's appalling.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.